Imagine this. You're standing at the peak of a mountain you never intended to climb. The air is thin. The silence, deafening. For years, you chased something: money, meaning, mastery. You pushed through the grind, the ego battles, the 3 a.m. spirals. And then, one day, something snapped. Or maybe it bloomed. You awoke. Not in the poetic, Instagrammable way that glows with soft light and lotus petals, but in the violent, disorienting rupture of the soul. One moment, everything mattered. The next, nothing did. Your ambition evaporated. Your goals hollow. Your hunger gone. You see through the game, and now, you don't want to play. You wake up in the morning and there's no fire. Not because you're lazy. Not because you've failed. But because the fire burned everything away, even the need to move. You stare at your to-do list like a ghost watching their own life. It's all still there: emails, calls, dreams with deadlines. But now it feels like pantomime. A dance you can't unlearn, but no longer believe in. This is the paradox nobody warns you about. You've awakened, and now you're paralyzed. You thought awakening would bring boundless clarity, passion, and purpose. But instead, it's brought a strange, silent void. You understand more than ever, and care less than ever. You've seen through the illusion, but what's left? What do you chase once you realize there's nothing to chase? What do you build once you accept that everything is temporary? What do you want once you see that desire is the root of suffering? You used to run because you were afraid. Now fear is gone, and so is the motivation. You used to strive for more. Now you see that more was a trick of the mind. You thought awakening would energize you. Instead, it's made you still. And here lies the quiet torment that no one talks about. People celebrate the first stages of awakening, like it's a finish line. They don't tell you that what comes after is a kind of death. The death of effort. The death of craving. The death of meaning as you knew it. Because once the veil is lifted, you realize that the world runs on illusions. And now that you see them, you can't participate without pretending. Without lying to yourself. You've eaten the fruit of knowledge. And now you know. Success doesn't matter. Fame doesn't matter. Even peace doesn't matter. And yet, you're still here. In this body. In this life. So what now? If nothing has meaning, why move at all? If there's no ultimate reward, why struggle to win? If awakening was supposed to free you, why do you feel so lost? You look around and everyone else seems fine. They're grinding, climbing, achieving. Chasing status, followers, promotions. They're asleep, yes, but at least they care. You? You're in the waiting room between worlds. Too awake to go back. Too unanchored to move forward. You start to wonder. Was this a mistake? Was ignorance truly bliss? Is this what enlightenment feels like, or is this just numbness wearing holy robes? They told you awakening would bring bliss, joy, alignment. But they didn't tell you that bliss is still a craving. That alignment is still a path. They didn't warn you that once the ego collapses, there's no one left to dream the dreams. And so you sit there, fully awake, yet strangely lifeless. Like a candle whose flame went out because it touched the sun. But what if this isn't the end? What if this emptiness isn't a void, but a womb? What if your lack of motivation isn't a flaw, but a phase? You see, there's something deeper, something buried beneath the spiritual stillness. A hidden engine. A force untouched by goals, dopamine, or delusion. But before we can reach it, we must understand why this happens. Why the very act of awakening, of seeing clearly, strips us of the will to act. Why the human soul, once freed from illusion, forgets how to move at all. To find that answer, we have to go back. Deep into the architecture of your psyche. Into the writings of dead philosophers and the shadows of modern life. Because the problem isn't that you lost motivation. It's that the game changed, and you're still trying to play by the old rules. So let's go deeper. The moment your eyes opened, truly opened, you crossed a line. Not a mystical threshold of rainbows and crystals, but a brutal, irreversible cognitive Rubicon. You saw the machinery behind the curtain. And in that moment, a fundamental psychological structure collapsed, the belief that your actions would eventually lead to permanent satisfaction. Most people never question this. Their entire lives are built on an unconscious wager: if I try hard enough, one day I'll feel whole. This is what Viktor Frankl might call the will to meaning. The human need to impose purpose on the chaos, to believe that your suffering will one day crystallize into something redemptive. This drive is essential. It's what gets soldiers through war, artists through madness, and workers through 40 years of fluorescent-lit offices. Meaning is the morphine we inject into the wound of existence. But what happens when you stop believing in the drug? That's what spiritual awakening does. It doesn't just remove your illusions, it removes your place inside them. You're not just disillusioned, you're disanchored. Carl Jung wrote that modern man is in search of a soul. He was speaking to the silent crisis of modernity, the death of myth, ritual, and shared purpose. But after awakening, you're beyond even that. You're no longer searching for your soul. You've found it, and discovered that it doesn't want what your ego wanted. You've shifted from ego to essence, but no one tells you that essence doesn't need anything. This is why motivation disappears. Because motivation is rooted in lack. It's built on a sense of not enoughness, on the illusion that something out there can complete you. When you were asleep, this made sense. You chased money, love, power. You suffered, yes, but at least you had direction. Now, the direction is gone. Because the core belief, the engine of all striving, has dissolved. You no longer believe in the promised land. Nietzsche warned us this would happen. He called it nihilism, the moment when our highest values lose their value. When we realize that the gods we worshipped were fictions. That progress, success, even morality were scaffolds built to keep us moving in circles. Once those fall, we face the abyss. Not as punishment, but as truth. And truth, without structure, is paralyzing. What you're experiencing isn't depression in the clinical sense. It's ontological exhaustion. A deep fatigue of the soul that comes from realizing there's nowhere to go. Jean-Paul Sartre described this in Nausea, that strange disorientation when everything becomes too real, too raw. When the veil of meaning slips and you see reality as it is, absurd, patternless, free-floating. The chairs in the room don't mean anything. The sky doesn't care that you exist. There is no script. Just atoms dancing. And yet, here you are. Awake inside the play you no longer believe in. Here's the real crisis. Your ego died, but your body is still here. Your heart still beats. Your lungs still breathe. Your hands still ache to do something. But the compass that once guided you is shattered. So you're left with the shell of your former life, but none of its driving force. You open your laptop. You stare at your plans. You know how to build a brand, or start a business, or write a book. But why? Why build anything when you've seen that nothing lasts? Why create when you know it's just more dust returning to dust? Why strive when the very act of striving now feels like spiritual betrayal? This is the hidden paradox. Awakening reveals freedom, but freedom can feel like death. Because the mind, conditioned by centuries of scarcity and struggle, doesn't know how to exist without purpose. Purpose was the cage, but it was safe. Now, unshackled, you're floating in a formless sea. And the most terrifying realization? No one is coming to save you. Not your guru. Not your therapist. Not your favorite podcast. Not the next book or plant medicine journey. They can point, yes. They can suggest. But only you can learn to live without the old scaffolding. Only you can walk through this desert of detachment and find a new source of fire. Aldous Huxley once said, "The truth that makes men free is for the most part the truth which men prefer not to hear." And the truth you've stumbled into is this. Most of your previous life was built on lies. Beautiful lies. Motivating lies. But lies nonetheless. And now, the question is no longer, how do I get motivated again? It's, what does it mean to live without lies? Who am I, when there is no reward waiting at the end? Can I move, not because I crave, but because I choose? Before we can answer that, we must go even further. Because right now, you're not just unmotivated. You're untethered. And the world is pulling at you with everything it has, advertisements, ideologies, expectations, all screaming, come back. But you can't. You won't. Because part of you knows, going back would be spiritual suicide. So the real danger isn't apathy. It's compromise. It's pretending you still care about what you used to. It's dragging your awakened soul back into an unawakened life just to feel something again. But this quiet limbo you're in? It's not the end. It's a chrysalis. And soon, very soon, the consequences of staying asleep, or half awake, will become unbearable. Because what the world doesn't understand is this. There's a price to awakening. But there's a greater price for ignoring it. You may think you're alone in this. Sitting silently in your own skull, watching the drama of the world go on without you. But look more closely. Beneath the surface of civilization, there is a strange epidemic, one not talked about in news headlines or self-help books. It's the slow, spreading crisis of the awakened soul trapped in a system built for sleepwalkers. You see it in the eyes of the man who made millions, then quietly sold everything to live in a van, only to find that freedom without direction is just a new form of confinement. You see it in the woman who left her corporate job for a spiritual retreat in Bali, meditated until she dissolved, and then came home unable to answer a single email. You see it in the artist who found God on ayahuasca, burned his old work, declared himself free, and then disappeared into the algorithmic abyss, posting nothing ever again. It's not burnout. It's not depression. It's post-awakening paralysis. And it's more common than you think. But the most dangerous thing about it? It's invisible to the world. Because from the outside, you still function. You smile. You nod. You go through the motions. But inside? You're quietly bleeding meaning. You're becoming a ghost. You might think you're just taking time to figure things out. But time doesn't help if you're asking the wrong questions. Because this isn't about how to reignite your old fire. It's about understanding that the entire structure you once used to define reality is gone. And yet you're still trying to operate as if it's intact. Let's talk about systems for a moment. Modern society is built on momentum. The grind, the hustle, the endless chase, these are not just cultural trends. They're psychological infrastructures. They're designed to give the illusion of progress in a world where death is certain and meaning is optional. Motivation, in the collective psyche, is currency. It's what keeps economies running, brands building, followers growing. The moment you lose motivation, you're no longer valuable to the system. You become a liability. A misfit. An anomaly to be reabsorbed, repackaged, or medicated. So what happens when more and more people awaken, and unplug? When they realize that climbing the ladder only gets you to a better view of the abyss? The system begins to panic. It creates louder distractions. Stronger identities. Faster dopamine loops. It whispers. Maybe you just need a new goal. Maybe you haven't found your true passion. Maybe you should monetize your awakening. And if you're not careful, you'll believe it. You'll mistake stillness for stagnation. You'll interpret your numbness as failure. You'll try to repackage your clarity into content. But let me say this clearly. The world does not know what to do with people who no longer want anything. It is threatened by those who don't salivate at the bell. Who don't respond to praise or punishment. Who've seen the gears turning and decided not to spin with them. So it gaslights you. Tells you that your emptiness is pathology. That your lack of drive is dysfunction. That your awakening is regression. It pathologizes your peace and diagnoses your detachment. But here's the unseen consequence. The longer you pretend to care, the sicker you become. Because motivation is not something you can fake. It's either rooted in illusion, or born from something deeper than desire. And until you find that root, you'll be living on borrowed fire. Going through the motions, betraying your truth one checkbox at a time. The cost? A slow erosion of your spirit. Not loud enough to call an emergency, but relentless enough to kill you by degrees. And while you quietly unravel, the world around you doesn't slow down. It speeds up. It floods you with new things to want, new fears to chase, new tribes to join. But now, you're awake. You see the code. You see how it works. You see that passion is often performance. That goals are often distractions from death. That purpose is often just well-dressed panic. So you stand still. And the world hates stillness. Because stillness cannot be sold. But what if stillness is not the problem? What if this silent state you're in isn't the end, but the edge? A liminal space between two realities. One ruled by dopamine, deadlines, and desperation. The other by presence, sovereignty, and something older than ambition. Because here's the ultimate trap. If you mistake this phase for failure, you'll go backward. You'll re-enter the dream just to feel alive again. You'll trade clarity for momentum. And the world will reward you for it, with applause, likes, and new to-do lists. But if you wait, if you sit with the emptiness long enough, something begins to shift. Not motivation as you once knew it. Not the carrot on the stick. But something quieter. Stronger. A current beneath the surface. A movement not driven by lack, but by presence. Not by hunger, but by wholeness. You begin to act, not because you must, but because it is true to move. You speak, not to be heard, but because silence becomes unbearable. You create, not to prove, but because creation is how stillness breathes. But you're not there yet. Right now, you're standing in the ashes of everything you used to be. And before you can rebuild, you must grieve. Grieve the loss of your old ambition. Grieve the death of your drive. Grieve the part of you that needed the world to validate your fire. Because that part is gone. And if you keep looking for it, you'll never find what comes next. So here you are. Standing on scorched earth. The temples of your old desires lie in ruins. The fire that once drove you, extinguished. And yet, something flickers. It's not the old fire. Not ambition. Not hunger. It's something quieter. Wilder. Untamed. A kind of presence that doesn't need a reason to burn. This is where the rebellion begins. But make no mistake, this rebellion isn't loud. It isn't glamorous. It doesn't come with slogans, hashtags, or morning routines. It begins in the stillness. In the refusal to perform. In the radical choice to do nothing, until something true wants to move through you. This goes against everything you've been taught. Because the world doesn't fear chaos. It fears sovereignty. It fears people who no longer respond to its levers. People who've seen through the illusion and didn't flinch. Who can sit in the void without reaching for distractions. Who don't need to be pushed, pulled, praised, or punished to act. This is your power now. But it must be wielded differently. Because the old ways don't work anymore. You can't bribe yourself with false promises. You can't force yourself into momentum. You can't shame yourself into productivity. All those tools belong to the ego. The part of you that once thought worth came from doing. Now, you must learn to move from being. So how do you break free? It begins with an act of radical permission. Let it fall. All of it. Let the goals fall. Let the 5-year plan fall. Let the identity of the motivated one fall. Let the need to feel like you're progressing fall. Because you're not here to rise inside a system you no longer believe in. You're here to build something that the system can't comprehend. Start by asking different questions. Instead of, what should I do, ask, what wants to move through me? Instead of, what am I here to achieve, ask, what am I here to embody? Instead of, how do I get motivated again, ask, what does my soul need to express? Motivation is too small a word for what you're here to do. This isn't about getting back to work. This is about reclaiming the origin of work, action as a sacred expression of being. Not as a transaction. Not as a means to an end. But as a form of worship. Think of the mystics. Laozi wandering through the mountains, not chasing success, but dissolving into the Tao. Rumi spinning in circles, not to entertain, but to translate God into movement. Marcus Aurelius rising each day, not to be praised, but to serve what was just and true. They were not motivated in the modern sense. They were possessed by something deeper. A kind of flame that doesn't burn for recognition, but for revelation. You have access to that same flame. But only if you stop trying to relight the old one. Here's what that looks like in practice. You stop chasing clarity, and start honoring curiosity. You let go of needing a final answer before you move. You follow breadcrumbs. Hunches. Whispers. You allow not knowing to be holy. You stop waiting to feel inspired, and start acting from integrity. Not from hype. Not from hype playlists or morning mantras. But from a deep sense of, this feels true. You stop obsessing over outcome, and start falling in love with process. You let go of where it's all going. You realize that fulfillment isn't in arriving. It's in showing up as real. You stop asking what the world wants, and start listening to what your soul can't shut up about. And in doing this, you rebel. Not with noise, but with depth. Not with violence, but with clarity. Not with ambition, but with alignment. This is not a call to drop out of life. It's a call to enter it differently. To stop mimicking meaning, and start becoming it. Because once you move from this new place, something wild begins to happen. Your actions feel weightless. Your words carry power. Your presence disturbs the system, because it cannot be categorized, predicted, or manipulated. You become ungovernable. Not because you're defiant. But because you've become undefinable. You're no longer climbing the ladder. You're standing at the edge of the forest, carving your own path with trembling hands and ancient bones. And when people ask you what you're doing, you'll have no answer. Only a smile. Only a feeling. Only the quiet knowing that for the first time, you're not running from life. You're inhabiting it. This is the real revolution. Not the performative one. Not the curated one. Not the one you can post about. But the kind that begins in silence. In your bedroom. At 3 a.m. When you finally stop trying to go back to who you used to be. When you stop trying to be motivated and start becoming honest. Honest about your confusion. Honest about your stillness. Honest about the strange, sacred space you now live in. Because from that honesty, something begins to grow. Not a brand. Not a goal. But a kind of integrity that can't be taken from you. And that is the first true step toward what comes next. Not a return to fire. But a descent into root. Not the chase for answers. But the embodiment of a deeper question. There comes a moment, after the stillness, after the crumbling, after the rebellion, when something finally clicks. Not like an idea. Not like a breakthrough. But like a door, ancient and heavy, creaking open at the back of your soul. You don't hear it. You feel it. A soft hum behind everything. A pulse. A presence. Like the universe exhaling through your ribcage. And for the first time, you understand something so simple, it undoes you. You were never supposed to be motivated. You were supposed to be moved. Moved by life. Moved by love. Moved by truth, beauty, terror, and the ache of the stars collapsing inside you. All this time, you thought you had a problem. You thought your lack of drive was a malfunction. You tried to fix it, hack it, fight it. But now you see. You weren't broken. You were being emptied. Emptied of the noise. Emptied of the false fires. Emptied of the need to chase, to prove, to become. Because only in the emptiness could the real current arrive. Not a motivation that pushes from behind. But a current that pulls from within. This is the ultimate truth. That you are not here to perform some cosmic checklist. You are not here to win a game you never agreed to play. You are not here to awaken, just to return to the grind with better breathing techniques. You are here to remember. To remember the original movement. The one before goals. Before effort. The one that made the trees grow and the birds sing and the oceans roar long before humans could write about purpose. That same force lives in you. And when you're quiet enough, when the ashes have settled, you can feel it. It doesn't motivate. It animates. It doesn't demand. It invites. It doesn't scream. It sings. And the song is not a command. It's a call. A call back to participation. Not out of duty, but devotion. Not because you have something to prove, but because the miracle of breath insists on being lived. You were never meant to climb a ladder. You were meant to dance with gravity. You were never meant to conquer the mountain. You were meant to merge with it. And the reason you lost all motivation after awakening is because awakening stripped you of illusion. And illusion is what the world called meaning. Now, you are left with something rawer. Less dramatic. But infinitely more real. A kind of being that doesn't ask for applause. A kind of movement that doesn't come from desire, but from deep alignment. What you mistook for apathy was actually your soul rejecting the unnatural. What you thought was numbness was your nervous system recalibrating to a different frequency. You're not disengaged. You're being rerouted. Not in productivity. Not in performance. But in presence. In the kind of presence that doesn't need a reason. In the kind of presence that is its own reason. You start to notice it in small things. The way your hand reaches for the pen, not to finish a project, but because the page is calling. The way you move your body, not for gains, but because stillness asks to be expressed in form. The way you speak, not to convince, but because silence gave birth to words that must be spoken. There's no fanfare. No dopamine rush. Just truth. Quiet, holy, irrevocable truth. This is what the mystics were pointing at all along. This is why the monks smile for no reason. Why the poet writes in the dark without ever sharing the lines. Why the awakened ones disappear, not to escape, but to become available to life itself. You're not here to fix your lack of motivation. Because that lack was sacred. It was your exit wound from illusion. Your ticket out of the prison of productivity. Your passage into original being. So the final realization is not a trick. It's not a technique. It's not a 3-step method to reignite your fire. It's a surrender. To a life lived from the inside out. To movement without manipulation. To creation without craving. To doing as a form of being. From this place, action returns. But not as compulsion. Not as noise. It returns as a whisper. A stirring. A holy yes. And when you act from that place, there's no fatigue. Because you're no longer pushing. You're being carried. You don't need to hustle to be worthy. You don't need to climb to be seen. You don't need to burn to prove you're alive. You already are. Fully. Quietly. Radiantly. And that is enough. So now, the question is no longer, why do I have no motivation after awakening? The real question is, are you ready to live without needing motivation at all? Are you ready to be moved, not by fear or fantasy, but by the deeper force that pulses through all things? Because if you are, then your stillness is not a prison. It's a throne. And you are not broken. You are being recalled to the source. Welcome home.